Tonight was never meant to be historic. It was supposed to be another predictable evening under the bright studio lights, rehearsed introductions, polite smiles, two chairs facing each other across a polished wooden table. The crew had run through the script twice. The cameras were warmed up, the lighting was perfect, and millions of viewers waited for what they assumed would be just another interview. But destiny doesn't follow scripts. Sometimes it writes its own. When he walked onto the stage, confident, powerful, carrying the swagger of a man who had ruled headlines for years, the audience erupted. He loved that sound. He always had. Applause was his armor. Praise was his oxygen. But what he didn't know was that tonight's applause wasn't going to protect him. Tonight, it would echo behind him as he walked straight into a question that would shatter his image like glass. She was already seated, calm, composed, a pen resting lightly between her fingers. Katie Couric. A woman who didn't raise her voice to win an argument. She raised the truth. She began the night with a smile so gentle that it almost felt like a trap, and maybe it was. Because underneath that smile was a question she had prepared for weeks. A question designed not to embarrass, not to corner, but to reveal. It started simple. Too simple. How do you define honesty in leadership? For a man who built his world on soundbites and spectacle, it should have been easy. But those words hit something he wasn't prepared for. His trademark laugh came late. His answer was polished, sharp, and delivered with the confidence of someone who had practiced it 3 times in the mirror before arriving. But as the sentence left his mouth, something unexpected happened. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just stared. Silence. A silence so thick that even the cameras seemed to freeze. Then she leaned forward, and with a voice low enough to force everyone to listen, she said, "Then help me understand this." And she placed a folder on the table. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a folder. He blinked. Twice. The room tightened. Inside that folder was the beginning of a collapse. Dates, statements, contradictions, moments the public had forgotten but Katie had not. She didn't accuse him. She didn't attack him. She just opened the folder like someone opening a window to let in fresh air. But for him, it felt like a cold wind hitting the cracks in a wall he believed was unbreakable. The first question wasn't an attack. The second wasn't either. But the third? That was the one that changed the air. "Were you honest here?" The clip she referenced flashed behind them on the studio screen. His face. His words. His certainty. But tonight, that certainty looked different, older, weaker, exposed under a spotlight it wasn't prepared for. He shifted in his chair. His smile tightened. His breath caught a little too sharp. For the first time in years, he wasn't controlling the room was controlling him. Millions watching at home felt the shift instantly. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was an examination. Katie didn't flinch. Her calmness wasn't power, it was precision. She had spent her life asking questions that pushed people toward truth, and tonight she had found the pressure point that even he had avoided. He tried to laugh it off. A familiar tactic, almost a reflex. But the laugh didn't land. It didn't even sound like him. It sounded nervous. The audience noticed. The camera noticed. And most importantly, he noticed. Because for the first time ever, the applause wasn't his shield. The cameras weren't his allies. The spotlight wasn't his stage. Tonight, everything he once controlled was slipping away. Katie pressed again. Not louder. Not harsher. Just closer. Every second stretched longer than the last, and the air grew so heavy that even the crew felt it standing behind the cameras. Someone later said it was like watching a skyscraper tremble. Not crash, not fall, but tremble. Because trembling means you're watching something that never breaks, begin to break. And that's when it happened. The moment that would replay on social media for weeks. His face froze. His eyes stiffened. His posture tightened. He didn't have an answer. Not a real one. Not one that survived contact with the truth she had placed in front of him. That 1 second, that single hesitation, was the spark. A nation leaned forward. Comment sections exploded. Clips began circulating before the interview even ended. Katie Couric had asked the question, but his silence gave the answer. Whether he realized it or not, the The story had already started. And by the time part 2 begins, everything he once stood on, confidence, control, public image, will be fighting to stay upright. Because tonight wasn't fate. It wasn't an accident. It was a moment designed by truth, waiting patiently for him to walk into it. And he did. The studio lights felt hotter now, brighter, almost hostile, as if even the technology in the room knew what was coming. He tried to relax his shoulders, straighten his tie, regain control, but control wasn't something he owned anymore. It belonged to her, and she was using it with surgical precision. Katie Couric didn't open with fireworks. She didn't need to. She opened with clarity. That's her power. A question so clean, so simple, that any attempt to dodge it becomes obvious. She picked up her pen, tapped it once against her notepad, and asked her next question in a tone so steady it could cut steel. "Let's talk about consistency," she said. Consistency. A small word. But in an interview like this, it's a landmine. He smiled. The rehearsed smile, the public relations smile, the smile meant to charm. But this time the smile didn't fit the moment. It felt stretched, almost fragile. He leaned forward as if trying to close distance, trying to regain dominance. That's when she dropped the first sheet of paper from her folder onto the table. A date. A quote. A headline. Then she lifted her eyes and asked, "Is this accurate?" He blinked. A half-second delay, but every viewer noticed. "Yes," he answered too quickly, too sharply. "And this next statement?" she asked, placing another page beside the first. "Is this also accurate?" His jaw tightened. "Of course. I stand by everything I've said." Everything. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The word alone carried weight. That's when the real interrogation began. Katie leaned back in her chair, a small gesture, but psychologically devastating. It signaled confidence. It signaled, "I'm not threatened. You are." And he felt it. He shifted, almost imperceptibly, but the camera caught it. Millions watching saw him lose a fraction of ground. "So help me understand," she continued. "If both statements are true, why do they contradict each other?" The studio didn't move. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even a breath loud enough to interrupt the tension. He froze for a moment, then launched into his usual defense mechanism, overwhelmed the room with noise. More words, louder tone, doubling down, deflecting, reframing, repeating the same line 3 different ways. It was his signature tactic. If you bury truth under enough noise, maybe the audience stops looking for it. But Katie Couric wasn't the audience. She waited. Every time he paused for approval, she gave him nothing. Every time he used humor to escape, she let it fall flat. Every time he tried to dominate, she didn't even blink. This wasn't an argument. This was a mirror. And for the first time in years, he didn't like the reflection. She leaned forward again, elbows on the desk, voice dropping lower, intimate, disarming, dangerous. "You're telling us both statements are true. But they can't both be true, can they?" He inhaled sharply. And here, right here, is where the interrogation became a psychological dismantling. Katie didn't accuse him of lying. She didn't need to. She simply forced him into a corner where any answer would expose something he wanted to hide. He tried pivoting. She pivoted with him. He tried expanding the timeline. She narrowed it. He tried blaming context. She read the context aloud. Every strategy he had built his career on, the charm, the bravado, the comedic timing, the rhetorical misdirection, none of it worked. Katie had stripped the conversation down to facts, and facts were more powerful than fury. A bead of sweat traced the side of his face. Small, almost invisible. But the camera zoomed in at the exact wrong moment. The kind of moment that goes viral before the interview even ends. Katie watched him carefully, then asked the question that sliced through every defense he had left. "Why should the American people trust your words, when your words don't trust each other?" It was overkill. A masterstroke. Delivered calmly. Professionally. Without an ounce of hostility. But the impact? Nuclear. He opened his mouth, then stopped. Opened it again. Stopped again. That hesitation, that 2-second struggle, was more powerful than any accusation she could have made. Because viewers weren't hearing her now. They were hearing his silence. He looked down. A mistake. When a man who built an empire on confidence looks down, it signals something worse than fear. It signals truth. Katie saw it. The audience saw it. And he knew they saw it. He forced a laugh, but it came out thin, brittle, almost desperate. He tried regaining control by going louder, stronger, more aggressive. But Katie didn't change her tone. She didn't match his volume. She didn't respond emotionally. She simply said, "Let's go to the next example, shall we?" And that single line, polite, neutral, devastating, broke something in the room. Because now it wasn't just an interview. It wasn't even an interrogation anymore. It was the beginning of a collapse. And by the time part 3 begins, the cracks will no longer be cracks. They will be fractures. By now the room had transformed. The studio no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a courtroom where the audience was the jury and the spotlight was the judge. He was sweating, slightly flushed, and trying, desperately, to regain the version of himself the public expected. Bold, witty, untouchable. But the truth is, untouchable men crack the loudest. Katie Couric noticed it before he did. A twitch at the edge of his mouth. A too hard blink. A swallow that arrived half a second too late. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She didn't lean into the weakness. No, her expression stayed steady, almost gentle, as if she was giving him one last chance to breathe before the next wave hit. And that's what made it even more devastating. He adjusted his tie again, the third time in 5 minutes. A small gesture, but small gestures are loud under tension. He thought it made him look composed. Instead, it made him look like a man trying to hold himself together piece by piece. "Let's revisit something you said earlier," Katie began softly. He tensed. That calm voice of hers was becoming more dangerous than any aggressive interviewer he'd ever faced. Aggressive people he could overpower, volume beats volume. But calm? Calm exposes cracks like cold air hitting glass. Katie set another paper on the table, sliding it toward him like a truth he didn't want to touch. "You stated this," she said, tapping the quote with her pen. "But then earlier, you stated the exact opposite. Which one do you want the American people to believe?" The pause after her question was not empty, it was loaded. He inhaled sharply. "Well, that's taken out of context," he snapped. Katie nodded slowly, as if inviting him to continue. "No problem. Give us the context." He froze. Context. A simple word. A terrifying request. Because context requires consistency, and consistency was the very thing falling apart. He shifted again, producing a forced laugh that didn't match the tension in his eyes. Humor, his last reliable weapon, suddenly sounded like static. "Come on, Katie," he said, leaning back with exaggerated confidence. "You're twisting this." She didn't even blink. "Then untwist it for us." A clean strike. Quiet. Deadly. The audience leaned forward. The energy stretched tight across the room. He felt the walls closing in, not physically but psychologically. And that's what begins to break a person, when they feel trapped inside their own narrative. The camera zoomed in just slightly, catching the flicker at the edge of his eye, a flicker that screamed, "I need to escape this." His voice rose, sharper now, irritated. "You're interrupting me." "I haven't spoken in 20 seconds, she replied calmly. His face tightened. This was no longer discomfort, it was bruised ego. He straightened in his chair, trying to reclaim authority. His hands, usually expressive and controlled, now moved too quickly, slicing the air with defensive gestures. Every movement had a hint of panic behind it. Then came the moment. A moment that defines cracks better than words ever could. Katie placed both quotes side by side on the desk. Identical topic. Opposite statements. She didn't ask a question. She just let silence do its job. Silence is a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. He stared at the papers, jaw tightening, breath growing uneven. You could almost see the thoughts racing behind his eyes. How do I spin this? How do I turn this? How do I regain control? But the more he scrambled internally, the more clearly the cracks appeared externally. His face flushed. His voice trembled, Not much, but enough for millions to notice. Even his posture betrayed him. The man who once commanded stages now looked like someone sinking into his own chair. Katie finally spoke, softly, painfully softly. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to understand you." The pause. "So help me understand, which version of you should the public trust?" He opened his mouth. No sound. Then another attempt. Still nothing. That silence wasn't just a mistake. It was a confession. He slammed his hand lightly on the table, a burst of frustration breaking his composure. "This is unfair," he muttered. Katie raised an eyebrow. "What's unfair? The question? Or the answer?" A direct hit. He looked away, the fatal gesture. In high-profile interviews, looking away means running. And the camera captured the run in full HD. Katie watched him not with victory, but with clarity, like someone witnessing a truth reveal itself. The cracks weren't subtle anymore. They were widening, spreading, becoming impossible to hide. And the nation watching felt it too. Because when a man who built a reputation on strength suddenly shows weakness, the weakness becomes headline news. The air feels thick, almost electric, like the moments before a storm breaks. He isn't just uncomfortable anymore, he's cornered. And there is nothing more dangerous than a cornered man whose ego has always been his armor. Katie Couric senses it. The audience senses it. Even he senses it, though he would never admit it. This is the part where the interview stops being questions and becomes consequences. He leans forward abruptly, elbows stiff, as if trying to reclaim physical space in a room that no longer belongs to him. But the attempt comes off as desperate, not dominant. His voice sharpens, not because he's confident, but because he's losing control of the narrative he once dictated with ease. Katie, meanwhile, sits perfectly still. Not rigid, not aggressive, just still, the kind of composure that makes someone else look unstable. "Let's move on," she says, flipping the page with a calmness that feels like a blade. Her voice is low, even, and completely free of emotion, which is exactly why it hits harder. He tries cutting her off. No, hold on, you're twisting this whole thing." She looks up, slow and steady. "What exactly am I twisting? The quote, or your reaction to the quote?" He freezes for half a second, long enough for millions watching to catch the panic flicker in his eyes. The panic he's trying so hard to hide. He shifts again, tugs his suit jacket, forces a laugh, but the laugh breaks halfway through. It's thin, shaky, defensive. The kind of laugh a man uses when he's trying to convince himself the room isn't slipping out of his hands. Katie gently places another document on the table. Another contradiction. Another inconsistency. Another truth he can't escape. "Explain this one," she says. He doesn't even look this time. "I don't need to. Everyone knows what I meant." "Then just say it clearly," she replies. Another calm hit. Another precise strike. He explodes, not loudly but sharply. "I am saying it clearly." The microphones pick up the tremor in his voice. The audience hears it instantly. Millions watching at home lean closer to their screens. Katie does the opposite. She leans back. Hands fold gently in her lap. Eyes steady. Expression neutral. And in that contrast, his rising anger versus her grounded calm, the break becomes obvious. Not just visible. Unavoidable. "You're raising your voice," she says almost kindly. "I'm not raising my voice," he snaps, raising his voice again. Katie nods slightly. "All right, then let's proceed." That one line, that soft, unbothered, non-reactive line, is what breaks him further. Because nothing threatens a loud man more than a quiet one who won't bend. He starts speaking too fast. He starts contradicting himself mid-sentence. He starts gesturing too big, too aggressively. This isn't confidence. This is collapse disguised as force. Katie lifts a finger. Not rudely. Not assertively. Just enough to pause him. "1 second, she says. "Let's slow down." Slow down. 2 words that sting more than insults. Slow down means you're losing control. Slow down means you're revealing too much. Slow down means the break is showing. He slams a hand lightly against the armrest of his chair, not hard, but enough to make a sound that the microphones amplify. A sound that feels symbolic. A sound that will replay on social media again and again as the moment everything shifted. Katie doesn't react. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't meet force with force. Instead, she says something devastating. You seem upset. Is it the question or the answer that bothers you? Silence. The kind of silence that lasts 3 seconds but feels like 30. He swallows. His jaw clenches. His eyes dart to the crew, then to the audience, as if searching for an escape, a lifeline, a way out. But there is no escape. Not anymore. Every word he speaks now is another thread unraveling from the image he spent years building. And then it happens. The moment social media will freeze, analyze, loop, slow motion, screenshot, and meme for weeks. He stands up. Quickly. Abruptly. Too abruptly. The chair shifts behind him. The microphone cable tugs. The audience gasps softly. Katie looks up at him, calm as ever, and with a perfectly steady voice asks, "Are you leaving?" He doesn't answer. He adjusts his suit jacket. He looks toward the exit. A man who once controlled crowds with applause now can't control his own breath. Katie waits. Not demanding. Not judging. Just waiting. And sometimes waiting is more powerful than speaking. His chest rises and falls, once, twice, 3 times. And he mutters something under his breath that the microphone barely catches. "I don't need this." Then he steps away from the table. Not a walkout yet. Not fully. But the moment before a storm breaks. The moment where pride replaces logic. The moment where power chooses flight over truth. The tension in the studio had reached a point where you could practically hear the heartbeat of everyone watching. He stood there, half turned toward the exit, half anchored to the chair he'd just abandoned, caught in a war between pride and consequence. One step forward meant surrender. One step back meant facing the truth he'd been dodging for the last 30 minutes. Katie Couric didn't rush him, didn't prod him, didn't even speak. She simply let the moment breathe, and the silence became the loudest sound in the room. He cleared his throat. Twice. Adjusted his jacket again. Straightened his tie even though it was already perfect. These were not the movements of a confident man. They were the movements of someone desperately trying to rebuild an identity that was cracking in real time. Finally, he said, "This is ridiculous," though his voice lacked its usual authority. It trembled, not in volume, but in certainty. And certainty was the one currency he had always traded on. Katie responded gently. "I'm just asking questions. You came here to answer them." That line detonated across the room. He stiffened, anger sparking behind his eyes. Not the powerful kind of anger, the panicked kind. The kind that grows when a person has run out of exits but still refuses to sit down. "You're twisting my words," he insisted. "I'm reading your words," Katie replied, tapping the papers before her. The audience drew a collective breath. He looked around, at the cameras, at the floor crew, at the silent audience. Every pair of eyes watching him. Judging him. Recording him. He could feel the weight of 1,000,000 viewers pressing down on him, and suddenly the stage that once felt like home had become a trap. And then he made the choice. A choice not of strength, but of escape. He turned fully toward the exit. The heels of his shoes clicked sharply across the studio floor, each step faster than the last, each step echoing like a countdown. Katie watched with a mixture of calm and clarity. No gloating. No shock. Just the face of someone who knew the truth. Walking away says more than any answer he refused to give. He reached the door. His hand hovered over the handle. A moment frozen in time. A moment every news outlet would replay endlessly. He yanked the door open. Lights spilled into the hallway. The studio air rushed outward. The audience gasped. And he slammed it shut behind him. The sound was unmistakable. A final punctuation mark. On an interview that was no longer an interview, but a collapse. Katie exhaled softly, turned toward the camera, and said with quiet precision, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back." The clip went viral before the commercial break even started. The door had barely stopped vibrating from the force of his exit, yet the world outside the studio was already reacting. It was as if the slam had cracked open a vault of opinions, emotions, and long-buried tensions. The interview wasn't just a piece of television anymore. It had become an earthquake, and its shockwaves were racing across the country. In the studio, the silence was surreal. Katie Couric remained seated, shoulders relaxed, pen resting lightly in her hand. She didn't smirk. She didn't sigh in relief. She simply breathed, slowly, calmly, as if she knew that the real storm was about to unfold beyond those walls. The crew exchanged glances. The audience whispered. Producers scrambled behind the scenes. But Katie stayed perfectly still, because she understood one truth. History doesn't need noise. It needs clarity. As soon as the cameras cut to commercial, phones lit up like a constellation of fire. Thousands of notifications across the control room. Clips already uploaded. Screenshots already reposted. Hashtags multiplying by the second. What happened in minutes would take weeks to process. The walkout scene, the door slam, the half-sentence, the shaking voice, spread like wildfire. Some people praised him. He stood up for himself. He refused bias. That's leadership. Others criticized him. He ran away from the truth. He couldn't handle accountability. Real leaders don't walk out. But no matter what people believed, one thing was undeniable. Everyone was talking about it. News outlets interrupted regular programming with breaking news. Analysts appeared within minutes, armed with opinions they had not even fully formed. Every angle was dissected. Every freeze frame was analyzed. Every 3-second hesitation became a debate point. Psychologists weighed in. Body language experts broke down his breathing. Strategists discussed the impact on his legacy. One expert on a primetime panel said, "A walkout is not a moment, it's a message." Another tweeted, "You learn nothing from someone's answer. You learn everything from their reaction." Meanwhile, his team was in damage control mode. Drafting statements. Blaming bias. Rewriting the narrative. But the internet had already written its own. And that's when the real aftershock hit, the cultural divide. His supporters hardened, rallying behind him with louder voices. They defended the slam, turning it into a symbol. He walked away because the questions were unfair, they insisted. His critics became equally vocal, turning the moment into a warning. He walked away because the answers were uncomfortable, they argued. Two sides. Two truths. Two Americas watching the same clip. And seeing two different stories. The walkout had become a mirror. People weren't debating him, they were debating themselves, their beliefs, their fears, their definitions of strength and weakness. Late-night hosts joked about the door slam. Celebrities reacted. Even foreign news channels covered it, calling it the interview that shook American politics. Inside the studio, Katie Couric prepared to finish the segment. Someone told her she could skip the remaining questions since he was gone. She shook her head. "No," she said. "If the truth matters when he's here, it matters when he's gone." The strength of that line spread almost as quickly as the walkout itself. When the show returned from commercial, Katie looked into the camera, not triumphant, not emotional, just steady. "For those just joining us," she said calmly, "we had a moment. And moments have meaning." That clip went viral too. Because if his walkout represented avoidance, her composure represented responsibility. Behind the scenes, the hallway he stormed through was chaotic. Assistants rushed around him. Advisors whispered arguments. Someone tried handing him a talking point. Someone else tried calming him down. But he brushed past all of them, furious, not at Katie, not at the questions, but at something deeper. He had lost control. Not of the interview, but of the narrative. The one thing he valued most. For the next 48 hours, the country dissected every second of the interview. Clips replayed endlessly. Reaction videos flooded YouTube. Hashtags trended across platforms. People chose sides, reinforced beliefs, argued in comment sections as if the walkout was a personal judgment on their own worldviews. But the truth? The truth was simple. When a person walks out of a question, the world walks into the answer. And by the end of the week, one question dominated the national conversation. If he couldn't stay in a room with the truth, how could he lead a nation living in it? Days had passed since the walkout, yet the moment refused to fade. It lived everywhere, on phone screens, in classrooms, on podcasts, in late-night monologues, even whispered at dinner tables. But the true battlefield wasn't the interview, it was the aftermath. For the first time in years, the country wasn't asking, "What did he say?" They were asking, "Why did he leave?" In politics, speeches can be rewritten. Statements can be corrected. PR teams can reshape almost anything. But a reaction? A reaction is pure, unfiltered. And that's why this one terrified people. It showed something he never wanted them to see. Analysts argued endlessly. Half the nation insisted he walked out because the questions were unfair. Proof, they said, of a man refusing manipulation. The other half believed he left because the truth had cornered him, because a question had finally touched a nerve he couldn't protect. But quietly, beneath all the shouting, the most important shift wasn't in public opinion. It was in perception. For years, his strength had been the center of his identity. Unbreakable. Fearless. Dominant in every room. Yet one interview, one woman with a folder of facts, had revealed a different truth. Strength isn't measured by how loudly someone talks, but by how calmly they face what they fear. Couric never raised her voice, never lost composure, never attacked. And that calmness? It became the unexpected symbol of the entire event. People replayed the moment she asked, "Which version of you should the public trust?" Not because it was harsh, but because it was honest. That's the moment many realized. This wasn't about politics. This wasn't about sides. This wasn't about who you supported or voted for. This was about character, the kind that reveals itself when the cameras turn hot and the questions get close. In the weeks that followed, commentators called it the interview that fractured his myth. Others called it the door slam heard around the world. And some simply called it the moment he changed. But the truth is more complex. A single moment can't destroy a legacy, but it can redefine one. Because legacies aren't shaped by the speeches we prepare. They're shaped by the moments we cannot control. His walkout became that moment. A symbol. A warning. A turning point. People will remember his policies, his speeches, his rallies. But they will never forget the night he chose to leave instead of answer. And years from now, when historians replay the clip, they won't analyze his words. They'll analyze his silence. Couric said it best afterward, in a short comment that went viral on its own. Walking away doesn't end the question. It only ends your chance to answer it. And in that line, the entire story condensed into one truth. Power is not proven by staying in control. Power is proven by staying in the room. If this moment opened your eyes, hit subscribe, because here, we break down the stories that shape America. Drop a comment right now. Did he walk away out of confidence or fear? And don't forget to like this video so more people see the truth behind the moment that shook the nation.